Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and we are joined today, as always, in the John Hope Franklin Center with Miss TImonthy Anne Burnside, who's a curatorial specialist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. She's been visiting us at Duke. She gave a guest lecture just yesterday at Duke's History of Hip Hop course, which is co-taught with myself and, of course, Patrick Douthit, aka Ninth Wonder. How are you doing today, TImonthy?
I'm doing well. It's so great to be here.
So I want to start with your backstory. You shared some of this with the class last night about you just driving to DC.
Yeah.
Jobless.
Homeless.
Not homeless, just without a home.
Right. Yeah.
And wanting to work at the Smithsonian. And, you know, more than a decade later, you know, here you are, you know, one of the critical components, at least in terms of vision and curation, of what is this astounding new museum. Talk about, you know, that travel.
Yeah,
from here to there. Right?
That was a big change. That was a huge change. I, after graduating from Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, where I studied history and English and music performance, I took some time in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to just kind of go, now what? And applied for a bunch of different internships and things around the country that I thought, you know, maybe were cool. And then I got a call from the Smithsonian. It was the Archive Center at the American History Museum, and they were interested in me coming for an unpaid internship to process music collections, because to have someone who knew about American history and could read music was very appealing to them, because as you're digging through manuscripts and other things, like if something wasn't labeled, I could tell, well, this is clearly like, you know, whatever. So I drove from Santa Fe up to northern Wisconsin for the holidays in December, and then drove out to Washington, D.C., and my first day in the city was January 1st of 2003. Wow. And I started the internship 3 days later, and about 2 weeks later, I had a paying job as a waitress, which I had been doing since I was 15 years old, and a place to live. The first 2 weeks were a little dicey, but I really, really thought that it was the chance I needed to take. Right. Because if I had waited for the next go-around of internships or the next cycle, that opportunity might not have been there for me.
And by 2006, you're now charged with starting to accumulate things, artifacts around hip hop, you know, for the American History Museum. Talk about what it was like at that moment.
That was crazy, because it took a little bit of convincing on my part with the leadership of the museum for them to kind of allow hip hop to get on the radar at that museum. The music collections there are amazing, but it's very heavy in jazz and, you know, folk music and, you know, a little bit of blues and a little bit of rock and roll. But the angle that I kind of took was like, look, you've got hip hop in your collection already, because hip hop samples all of these other
you got the
genres.
Source material here already.
You have the source material, and if you want to be part of this conversation moving forward, it's important to recognize what's happening now and how hip hop is embracing music of the past to create something new. And then they were kind of like, oh, that was the moment.
What's the first artifact that you bring to them?
It was a whole collective it was like a grouping of artifacts that were the first bunch. So we had a boombox carried by Fab Five Freddy back in the day. We had a turntable from Flash, and as a nod to DC, 2 records that he used of Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, Bust and Loose, with the marks, you know, on them in the plain sleeves, you know, and a journal from MC Light, and some things from Ice-T, including the 2 different versions of Home Invasion that were released. That's a whole story, and custom hand-painted jacket from Crazy Legs. And a few other things, but that all came together at the same time.
So when you're talking to Flash, and you're talking to Ice-T, and you're talking to Light, you're talking to Crazy Legs, back in 2005, 2006, and you're telling them what you're asking for and why, what is their response?
Initially, some of them were apprehensive, because to them, representation in the Smithsonian was not something that they saw for, people like themselves.
Right, and the Smithsonian is not necessarily someplace they thought of as accommodating.
Exactly.
Right, to black and brown folks.
Accommodating or welcoming,
Right.
inclusive, all of those words.
Right.
It wasn't that.
Right.
And
I mean, to
also,
be honest, I could imagine, I know even for myself back in 2006, Smithsonian is a place with some white shit.
Yep.
Yes.
Dead white men
Right.
and their legacies.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it is. So once the kind of, so that there was that, and there's also like, okay, so like Russell Simmons was there, and he was like, does this mean that hip hop's over? Like, is it dead now because it's being documented and preserved in this way? What does that mean, and how do we deal with that? And ultimately, they all saw that it was an opportunity to essentially start this dialogue,
Right.
and that to be involved, at the ground level was important. But it was, it was interesting, and it was a huge story because, the way that people think of what museums do, it automatically goes to an exhibition, right? And so the whole thing was like, oh, the Smithsonian's going to do a hip hop exhibit, and it was like, well, take it back, slow it down,
Right.
let us start acquiring some artifacts, and let us, kind of get something,
Right.
built first. And so that was really what that first step was.
What was the artifact that you brought in that the higher-ups at the Smithsonian went, we get it
We
now.
get it?
Yeah.
Well, the Chuck Brown records, once I explained what that meant, as to the people who are
Right,
familiar
in
with go-go
DC.
in DC,
Right.
and like we talked about DJing, and we talked about what that, line on the record meant, and the significance of all of that. That was and I kind of use that as an example, like this is what's being done with all different kinds of music, and this is what was being done prior to hip hop being on record. These are the kinds of things and the kinds of sounds that were coming together, and you've got that in the collection already.
Right.
And that, that kind of, there was some resistance, not resistance, but some of the Ice-T stuff was a little like,
Right.
wait, what?
Because he's
What?
controversial.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but and the fact that Home Invasion was the record,
Right.
that I was like, yep, this is what we're gonna start with. Cool, yeah.
As you're doing this work at the American History Museum of the Smithsonian, of course there's this work in the background to launch this new African American museum. Talk a little bit about the history that comes before this amazing museum is there, and your role in terms of moving over to that space and beginning to really having the freedom to start really documenting hip hop, in a museum space at the Smithsonian.
Well, the museum itself has been over 100 years in the making. So the initial idea came about as a way to recognize and commemorate African American soldiers in the Civil War. So I think it was the Negro Soldier Museum was the initial concept and title. And then over decades and decades, projects were launched and then forgotten, and then started and then stopped. And all of these things kind of, it evolved over time to be something completely different. But it wasn't until 2003 that it was actually signed into legislation that this was going to be a thing.
Under the Bush administration.
Under the Bush administration. And he spoke at the dedication.
Yes, that's the thing where he was flirting with Michelle Obama.
He was like one of the favorite speakers. Everyone was like, where's the side of you when you were president? Where was this? We didn't get this before. And then the Obama administration supported it. We initially thought it would be, a $500 million project. So Congress pledged half if we raised half.
Imagine, right.
Right, and we ended up raising almost somewhere between $30 and $50 million over our target.
Wow.
For the building itself. And so that, we broke ground, I think, in, was it 2012?
Yeah.
And, then there was just this big hole in the ground for a long time. And that was kind of strategic a little bit, like nobody wants that eyesore on the National Mall. So it was like, what do we have to do to get this to go away?
And the fact that folks don't understand, like if you're going to build a museum and you're going to house all these artifacts, right, like 40,000?
40,000 now, yeah.
You can't just build up, right?
No.
You also have to build down. Right?
Yeah, and so that was a lot of, like the local community was like, what is taking y'all so long? Because they didn't realize that we were digging 4 levels down,
right,
and that there would be 3 levels of exhibition space below, ground level,
right,
and that even that, we had to like do this whole new engineering approach
right,
when they actually started digging and discovered what the water situation was like. So that kind of was a little delay. Like there's like a bathtub underneath the whole museum that's holding the water out.
Right.
You know, so there are all of these, just kind of marvels in terms of the physical creation of the building. Never mind the struggle to get it where it is,
right,
and not be, not that there's anything wrong with being in Anacostia, but that wasn't exactly the presence
right,
that Lonnie was looking for,
right,
and so to be like front and center, like adjacent to the Washington Monument, was just a dream come true. Yeah.
Talk about, and you just mentioned his first name, but talk about quote unquote your supervisor, Dr. Lonnie
the
Burnside,
visionary,
and what it was like first of all working with him, and then watching him work, with all these different communities of folks, in terms of getting this project done.
It is unbelievable to be able to work not just under him, but alongside him.
Well, I've seen him work a room, so
it is. Yeah, you've seen it in person.
Right?
He,
highly skilled.
What is amazing about Lonnie is that he has a strong history with the Smithsonian. Right. So he started at Air and Space, and then he was at American History, and went to Chicago, and then finally was convinced after numerous attempts to get him back to come and lead this new museum. But he will say this: he is a curator, a historian at heart. And so for him to be able to oversee that work, balanced out a little bit the struggles in terms of the fundraising and the shaking hands and the making sure everyone's happy and okay, with knowing that at the end of the day that work was being done. And he is a rock star in the field.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anyone else who is hotter right now in this really small community of museum leaders. And he just was given the President's Award by the NAACP Image Awards, which is incredible, for someone who runs a museum.
A historian who runs a museum.
Yeah, it's amazing. And for him to give his staff the kind of confidence that he instilled this confidence in us that this can be done. Because to start a project like that with nothing, we had no artifacts in the collection, and to be given that freedom and that trust for my colleagues and myself to go out there and just find the stuff that would tell the stories that we needed to tell, and for the museum to embrace all of the stories that were essential, even if they were challenging, even if they were unexpected, if it was something that was crucial to what this museum would stand for, then we would go out and find a way to tell that story. And not to compare, but I came to the new museum in I think late 2008, early 2009. Compared that with like the way that hip hop came to American history, for example. This museum has always embraced hip hop specifically, but so many other stories and through lines, that it wasn't something I had. People ask me all the time, how hard did you have to fight to get Public Enemy in the museum? And I didn't at all. It was always part of the DNA in the actual development of the exhibitions, because my colleagues recognized how important that it needed to be there.
2 questions. What was the artifact that you absolutely had to have? And what's the artifact that you absolutely still need to have?
Oh, no. I'm not going to go there. I will. That, I mean, there's a very short bucket list of things that we would love to have, and I would love to get. You get those like career cases.
Yeah.
And some of them are in the works, so I'm not
Okay,
gonna. I'm
so
not
you're not
gonna. I'm not gonna share
Right.
today.
No professional secrets today.
Yeah,
Okay.
but there are of course figures. We were. There are a few individuals and figures whose stories we were not able to capture because we didn't get there in time, and that's hard, especially with the way that someone's death brings out the complexities of their,
right. Right.
of their situation, and so that is very challenging for us. And so to see things either go out into the world, into the hands of collectors or whatever, when we knew that there was an interest in the museum from that artist, that's hard.
Right.
But there are at the same time there are places in the museum where I get overwhelmed when I see those objects still. The Dilla equipment is one of those stories that I talked about yesterday,
And the fascinating thing that you said that like of all the stuff in terms of these social media references to holdings in the museum, it's not Nat Turner's Bible. It's not, Harriet Tubman's shawl. It's Jay Dilla's.
Yeah.
But
you think about who is interested in that story.
Right.
And so it's like who is going to look up, who is consistently looking up everything about Jay Dilla they can possibly get their hands on every day.
Right. And
so there's that crowd.
It's a much more of a global story.
It's a global story, and there are people who are fanatics, and so there's that element, right? And then there are people who are surprised.
Yeah.
Because they either know what it is or they don't, and either way it's something that they are kind of like taken aback by, that the Smithsonian's doing this. And so they share it kind of out of like, really? Like I would have never guessed kind of storyline. And then there are the people who are so, not against it, but are reluctant to understand why it belongs. And so then they share it because they learned something.
Right.
But also the generation of people who are interested in that kind of a story are digital already.
Right.
Like that's what they do.
Right.
Like they so people who are infatuated with the legacy of Harriet Tubman or Nat Turner might not be the ones who are jumping on Twitter to talk about it. So it's a different kind of scene. But that blew everything up in terms of what we were doing. And it kind of like made people pay attention to the museum, because this is 2014 that we made that announcement.
And these were news stories.
2 years out from
Washington
opening.
Post,
Everywhere, all over the world. And the AP story was shared, just astronomical numbers, which made me, incredibly, happy. But then I was always like, oh shit, okay, like, all right, now we got to do this right. And that was the trust that his mother and I had built to make sure that she, because it isn't just people saying, oh yeah, Smithsonian, cool, here's my stuff, then I'm like, word, have a nice life, and I keep it moving. Like it is a relationship. Because these people are trusting the museum and they're trusting me with that legacy.
You're watching Left of Black. We are here with TImonthy Anne Burnside from the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. For the moment, I will describe her as the curator for the stars. Because that's one, in terms of the role that you've played at the museum and the holdings, artifacts that you've brought in, right? And as you said, you've been building these relationships with folks. But for a moment, let's just talk about the sheer numbers of folks who have come through those doors since it opened. The excitement that we may have never seen, perhaps in this country ever, about the launch of a museum. The accessibility of this museum to folk who normally don't think that museums are places where they belong, either in terms of being the subject matter or as just folks passing through, seeing what's going on. Just talk about what that experience has been like.
It is absolutely overwhelming. We opened on September 24th of last year, and we had, I think it was close to 80,000 people come to celebrate the museum's opening that weekend, which is beautiful. And since then, as of 2 weeks ago, we have welcomed over 1 million people to the museum. So September, October, November, December, January, we are selling out free timed passes every month. So just yesterday, the day before yesterday, June became available at 9 a.m. and all 110 passes were gone before noon. 110,000 passes.
110.
Sorry, not 110. 110,000 passes were gone before 12.
And I could imagine the uptick just in the summertime because kids are out of school, the weather's warmer.
Right, and so those passes don't even include,
Right.
The 30 kids from wherever and the 40 kids from here that come in every day. So you've got the school groups, and then you've got, like the tour groups or the family reunion people and
sororities,
all of that.
fraternities, churches, right?
Right, so they're all using a separate system to get group passes. And so that adds even more. So it's, it is absolutely overwhelming. And the way that what you were saying, people are coming in, and this is a sanctuary.
Yeah.
This is a safe, especially now, this is a safe space, and this is a place that people come to see themselves reflected, but also to kind of, leave everything else outside for just a minute.
Yeah.
And think about how, because this huge question that everyone keeps asking, how did we get here as a country? How did we get to this place where this is our reality? People come into this museum because this is how you can understand that, and it's people who participated in different moments in history. I took someone through the museum a couple weeks ago who was at Emmett Till's funeral. And that moment for her, to be in that space in the museum, she was overwhelmed with grief in a way, but at the same time, she told me how grateful she was for that experience, and that other people are coming in and younger people are coming in and understanding that story and so many others and how they relate to today. And so that is, the outpour of emotion and just support in general, and the fact that people get in the building after having to reserve a pass maybe a month in advance or two, and then they go down to the history galleries and there's an hour-long wait, and they're like, that's cool, we'll wait, and it's just this kind of like shared energy in the building, and it is just creating. The museum itself is already doing something brand new, just in terms of what it is and the stories the way that it's come together, the community collecting that we've done, being a born digital museum, being a green building, being all of these groundbreaking things in terms of the field.
Yeah.
But then to have created a space that is unlike anything else in the world.
Let me talk
is
about
amazing.
That born digital piece, because one of the most heartening things I remember about those weeks, days up to the launch, was the day when the museum was open to media folks.
Yes.
And it wasn't, it wasn't just the traditional folks, right? But folks who got their little websites and folks who have a little bit of weight, on Twitter and Instagram, and just seeing folks walking through the museum, taking photos of things with their cell phones, it fundamentally changed the experience of what we think about as museums. And how important was it to have folks like yourself, for instance, I'll just say a much more digital generation, if you will, to be in the room as folks are thinking about this experience and being able to tell folks that has to be part, right? Yeah. This can't be someplace where we're like, you can't take pictures. Right. We need folks to take pictures and post them up on Instagram.
Right, and here's the hashtag, and here we've already thought about it all, and absolutely. And that's, so being born digital is like multiple kind of levels.
Right.
And we can't do any of that without processing our collections and making and digitizing them initially. So that's kind of what the Born Digital element is to the collections. So we aren't having to do what like American history and other museums might have to do, where it's like, oh shit, you know, we gotta catch up.
Right, we gotta go back.
We gotta go back
right.
and digitize stuff. But now we are digitizing everything as we get it. It takes a while sometimes, but that's happening. So that you have that, you know, oh, you know, it's the anniversary of this event, and we have this amazing collection. Do we have, you know, high-res photos that we can put on Twitter and Instagram? Like, boom, we've got them. It's ready to go. So there's that. But then it's also, and I have to shout out my colleague Lene Spruce, who, you know, single-handedly ran all of the social media campaigns, you know, for years, for like 2 years at least, leading up to opening, and then just killed it during Grand. We had a social media tent. You know, we had Facebook and we had Twitter and we had Instagram and we had Snapchat all at the table saying, how can we participate? You know, and that has never happened before either. And so that kind of like what I was talking about with the Dilla stuff, like that's reaching an entirely different generation, you know, and so you could come to the grand opening. So for that 3-day festival, you could come to the tent, you could do a 360 picture, you could do all of these things, but then you're welcome in the museum to engage, like you were saying, like you don't need to be a, you know, fancy reporter with a camera crew to come in and take pictures and video of the museum. Like we actually, I gave a tour at like 7 o'clock in the morning, the Thursday before grand opening, to this group of DC Instagram people. It was like 10 people who, you know, pre-arranged, you know, they're like influencers or what have you. So they came out and they had the museum to themselves. I think it was the early morning before the Beania Day. They had the museum to themselves for a little while. And they were like, the fact that you guys are even acknowledging Instagram as an important platform, you know, spoke volumes. And so we have to balance the traditional museum goers, you know, these generations of people who want to come in and just see the artifacts and read the labels, and they aren't interested in the touch tables, and that's not their scene. And that's great. We have all of that. But then we also have to be aware of the people who that's how they learn now. And to balance it is crazy.
And they're going to be the folks who are going to be the sustainers down the road. I mean, I see an interesting symmetry around the museum and Obama's first election in 2008. And let me, you know, explain just a little bit. You know, I was fortunate to be around a couple of days before the opening, and walking through the reception and just seeing the number of elderly black folks and overhearing conversations about, I never thought I would see anything like this, right? And it went very well with some of the conversations that folks heard, you know, in 2008 during the election. But then you have that younger generation, right, for which the only president they knew, is black, is Barack Obama. The only president they knew listens to Jay-Z, right, as one example. Who now you're talking about a young generation of folks who the only museums that they know is this museum, right? And what kind of impact that's going to have down the road in terms of how we think about the role of museums in our life and how accessible they should be, who they should be accessible with, what kinds of things, right? Because, you know, to get a little theoretical for a moment, right? You know, a few weeks ago, I showed to one of my classes of John Aconfer's Last Android History, right? And it's about this DJ figure, the data thief, and I was having this conversation with Greg Tate and Arthur Jafa, and they were like, you know, the DJ is so critical because the DJ, you know, maintains a certain kind of history, right? You know, it can't be all the data, right? So it's just a snippet of the data. I mean, that's what the mix is about, right? You know, this snippet of data that's important. I can't give you it all, but I can give you this little snippet. And I think about, you know, the exhibit, the digital exhibit that's in the museum of our friend Patrick Douthit, you know, of Ninth Wonder. How is trying to capture these digital snippets going to change? And we were talking about this last night. There are no more cassette tapes. Right, there are no more albums. You know, even the stuff that folks brought into the studio in terms of notes, all of that's disappearing, right? What's it gonna look like trying to archive the culture going forward when the culture is gonna largely exist in many ways in just simply data?
It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge because, you know, if you're in the museum, you'll see different, you know, journals or notebooks or lyrics or handwritten things. And now everyone's in the studio and they've got their phone in front of their face and the microphone.
Right.
Like literally, like they're doing it and they're looking at their phone.
Right, there's no more notepads.
Right, there's no more like doing this.
It's Google Doc, right?
Right, exactly, and it's iPhone Notes and whatever. So what is the artifact there? If I want to capture the creativity of the written word from an MC, what am I collecting? You know, and I was saying last night, like, is it a screenshot of their note in their phone? Like, how are we creating an artificial piece if they handwrite the lyrics, even though it's not in the moment that they're writing them in, which is what I really like to see. You know, I'm working on a couple of collections now where it's like you see the process, you see, you know, words scratched out, and it makes you think about how their creative journey evolves in that moment of writing that rhyme or whatever it is. And then the actual recording itself.
Right. Are they writing it on a tablet?
Right. What is it?
Right.
You know, and then so you know, the joke's like that, you know, eventually, you know, we're going to be out of jobs, right? Like that. What are you going to collect?
Or you know, what do you do with someone like Jay-Z who keeps it in his head?
All in his head. Right. So I have to be creative and think about what are the other objects I can use to tell those stories and document that, because it is, you know, if you're recording and it's all going immediately to a digital file, then what's the song? What do you put on display to represent the song? And how do you preserve the digital source, the digital file? And so what is the object? Is the object the hard drive? Is it, you know, like how does that work?
And there are going to be nerds who want the hard drive, right? Who want to see the hard drive. That's the reality.
Or even, you know, like someone we both know very well has a laptop that a certain beat was made on, you know, and it's a legendary story. So is it the laptop? That's the thing that tells that story? You know, so we have to think creatively moving forward, because it's not your traditional manuscripts and sheet music and handwritten lyrics and, you know, all of that, because that, even we were talking about last night, track sheets, mastering notes from sessions, things like that just aren't being created anymore.
If we're talking about this museum 10 years from now, what do you think of the conversations we're having about the National Museum of African American History and Culture a decade from now?
A decade from now? That we've done good on our promises. That's really, like, we have made a huge promise to continue to engage, to continue to start conversations in the museum that then go out into communities, that we've made promises that we will be in those communities, and that we will be present. It's really kind of a parallel thing with how I look at these relationships. You know, I'm not, like I said before, I'm not just saying thank you for your stuff and have a nice life. You know, that's not what we're going to do either. It's how is this sustained? How is this continuing? And so what are the ways we can continue to refresh the exhibitions? You know, because these are permanent exhibits. The 11 inaugural exhibitions are considered permanent. So there will always be, for the next, you know, 15, 20 years, if you will, musical crossroads, right? But then what are the stories that we're telling in that space, and how are those being updated, not just because we have to, because right now we're really looking at, in terms of rotating artifacts, right now it's what's necessary for the good of that object. We are not really focused on yet, you know, changing the story too much. It's more like, okay, those En Vogue dresses have a very short shelf life, so let's rotate the other ones in. You know, because we've got 4 sets of costumes from 4 different videos. That's an easy swap, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at now. But in 10 years, we'll have had, you know, hopefully at least like between 8 and 10 temporary exhibitions under our belt. You know, we have a gallery that's about 4,000 square feet. That we can do smaller, more focused shows. So hopefully those will have been out into the world as well. You know, and it's really just how have we been able to continue this relationship with the visitors? And kind of what you said, like, be the place that, I mean, in a way it would almost be nice to be taken for granted. You know, that people can come in and just know that they're going to see themselves in these stories. Just like you know, kids who are in elementary school now don't know life without a Black president.
Right.
This museum is going to change a lot of that, and it already is. So in 10 years, you know, hopefully I'm still around, and hopefully I've got some, you know, amazing new collections
Yes.
that are always coming
Yes.
in, and we can think creatively how those are being shared, because we don't always have the opportunity to put things on exhibit right away.
Right.
So what are those digital platforms? What are those programmatic opportunities,
Right.
educational opportunities
Right,
that
right,
we
right.
can, because of the platform that we have as the Smithsonian?
Right.
How can we bring these stories out there without having to put something in a case in DC?
Right.
Which is amazing and great, but that doesn't reach everybody.
Right. We've been here today with TImonthy Anne Burnside, who's a curatorial specialist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Thanks for joining us, TImonthy
Absolutely.
Anne.
Thank you for having me.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back.